Waltzing Among the Willows by Aurora Schlosswald. Chapter 7. Wanted for bank robbery. Contrary to what people in many parts of the country seemed to believe, very few opponents ever planned a time for a gunfight and stood facing each other while they fired. Although formal duels existed, they were primarily fought by the upper class, who adhered to strict rules during the battle. Even in towns west of the Mississippi, most people would settle their disputes with lawsuits rather than firearms, especially since the majority of towns had strict laws prohibiting guns. But when such a fight did occur, it was usually the result of alcohol leading to clouded judgment and an outburst of temper, or else the killer would lie in wait for his victim, not caring if he shot him in the front or the back. Most fights lasted only a few seconds, and all involved parties would hide behind any bit of cover they could find, often fleeing at the first opportunity. Whoever committed the first physical action, such as swinging his fist or reaching for his gun, was considered responsible for starting the fight, no matter how much he had been antagonized beforehand, and anyone who killed only as a means of defending himself or avenging the death of a loved one was usually spared from being locked in jail. Paul writhed in torment after the second gunshot. He had felt the sensation of a huge fist hitting him in the chest, but as he fell, he had fired his own gun. Now he could hear people clamoring around him. "That's Mark!" Klaus exclaimed. "He imitated the accent of the local people so well that I didn't recognize him at first. What was he doing here?" Ignoring the crowd, Paul gingerly felt his vest pocket. He wondered why his fingers hadn't reddened with blood, but when he removed his watch, he found the outlaw's bullet lodged in it. If not for the snake bite, he may easily have considered himself the luckiest man alive. "What happened?" the sheriff demanded. As Klaus explained what he had seen, Constance gazed piteously at the dead man's face. What a shame he had earned such a terrible reputation! His smooth face and muscular arms would no doubt have won him many female admirers, and his light brown hair perfectly complemented his eyes, which were neither blue nor green, but the loveliest combination of each. She immediately blushed, twirling a strand of her light blonde hair around her slender finger as she adjusted her hat. Her loving husband was a fine provider who blessed her with a happy home where he treated her as his equal. Why then should she be admiring another man? What would people say if they knew the way the sheriff's wife had been looking at a dead outlaw? Oblivious to his wife's actions, the sheriff was asking Paul if the saloon owner's story was true. "It is," Paul admitted. "Who shot first?" "He did." He struggled to get his breath. "Hit my watch." "Why'd you want to fight an outlaw?" Paul explained about the snake bite and how he had been unable to bring himself to end his own life. "Son, you ain't the law. You oughtn't have challenged this here feller to a fight, but since you knowed he was a bad man afore you started it, and he drew first, even laying hands on you afore you got outside, I'm going to say you was defending yourself, and I ain't going to ask no more questions." Slowly, Paul managed to rise to his feet. He was determined not to allow his parents to see him die, for he feared his mother would be unable to bear the sight of him suffering. "Can I go?" he asked. "Gimme your gun first. You can have it back when you ain't thinking of shooting yourself." After reluctantly handing over the weapon, Paul limped to the edge of town. At the very spot where he had so often envisioned building his home, he lay down, praying for either sleep or death to end his exhaustion. Word quickly circulated throughout the town, but everyone was careful not to let Paul's parents know that he had been involved in the gunfight. However, at the end of the day, the aging couple would be expecting their son to return home after working on the nearby ranch, and the townspeople were unsure how to tell them that their son lay in the throes of death. To everyone's astonishment, Paul walked into town a few hours later, whistling the Ocean Burial. The swelling in his wrist had receded, and he no longer limped as badly. Most bewildering of all was the purple snake draped over his shoulders, its gold markings gleaming in the sunlight. "Dare I ask?" the sheriff began. "I'm feeling better, thank you. I found something to put on the bite. Burned like the dickens, but I reckon if you mixed it with a few other things, it wouldn't hurt quite so bad." Although he had no idea what Paul could possibly have meant, or how a species of snake never before seen in the area had become involved, the sheriff was simply grateful that he wouldn't have to explain to the young man's parents how they had lost their son. "It's real hard to know sometimes how good can come of something," the youth continued. "Sometimes you go through a real bad time, or you lose someone you love, and there ain't nothing good about it. Circuit preacher once said, even though all things work together for good, we don't always see the good in this life. It's waiting for us in the hereafter." A smile tugged at the corner of the lawman's lips. "Do you think any earthly good can come of it?" He shrugged. "Reckon it could, but I don't rightly see how. I keep praying, 'Help thou mine unbelief.'" The sheriff beckoned for Paul to follow him, and he obliged, keeping the snake with him. When they entered the sheriff's office, the lawman returned Paul's gun and showed him a poster with a description of Mark's crimes and a cash amount offered for his arrest or demise. Paul's eyes widened. "That's enough to last a man over 10 years, even if he buys something real nice." "It's yourn." "What are you saying?" "You shot him, and you didn't break the law when you done it, so that there money's yourn. Might take a little while, but I'm a-going to tell the governor he owes you, and he'll see that you're rewarded right proper." As soon as Paul had claimed the bounty, he purchased the tract of land he had loved so much and immediately commissioned a fine house to be built there. Sadly, he would not have the pleasure of seeing his home gradually come into being, for he insisted on using the remaining money to go east and study science. Although they were sad to see him leave, his parents rejoiced that he would have the chance to further his education, so they gave their blessing. However, Paul was still absent. His parents, who frequently received letters from him, insisted that he would one day return and live on the land where he had nearly died, but the other townspeople weren't sure. Paul had more than enough money to start a new life, so why would he give a second thought to anything he had left behind? In the East, he could go to the theater or exhibition hall any time he wished, and the buildings had more modern structures than anything he would ever find in prairie grass. If he became ill, he would have access to a skilled physician. Many doctors found in the West were either charlatans or had proven themselves too unskilled at their professions to find employment back East. Pushing aside memories of Paul, Amelia continued her conversation with Constance. "You going to the dance this evening?" Constance asked. "I'm not sure," Amelia shrugged. "Klaus will most likely be there, and he keeps trying to pay me court." Meanwhile, Eleanor was taking her place at the bank. She hoped no one would give her any trouble, but would this establishment permit a woman to open an account without a man's signature? As she approached the counter, the door opened behind her and 3 men entered. Their faces were hidden by masks, and their hands rested on their pistols. "Everyone put your hands in the air," one of the men ordered gruffly, drawing his gun. Eleanor gasped sharply. "Are we being robbed? Oh, I feel faint." She fell backwards, and on impulse, the nearest man stepped forward to catch her. After she fell into his arms, he attempted to lay her flat on the floor, but while he was thus distracted, she seized his gun, aiming it at his heart. "I'll shoot him," she warned. The other 2 robbers stared in disbelief. "My late husband, rest his soul, taught me how to shoot. He wanted me to be able to defend myself and our future children. I know if I kill this man, you 2 will end my life, but I'm not afraid to die. I'll be with my Virgil again, and he shall escort me by the arm through the streets of heaven, a place where no bandits shall ever tread. Where, sirs, shall you go, if not heaven? What are your demands? One of the men asked. Leave the bank immediately. They begrudgingly left, and Eleanor felt several pairs of eyes staring at her. She smiled sweetly. I'm terribly sorry for having caused such a spectacle, she apologized. I was ever so frightened that someone might be murdered. No one spoke a word as she approached the counter. Good day, my dear sir. If you would be so kind as to inform me whether or not a lady is permitted to open an account when her husband is lamentably deceased? The teller looked toward his employer. Let her have it, he instructed. She sure earned it. Meanwhile, the robbers had fled the scene. She stole my gun, Claire complained. If the sheriff sees us near the bank, he'll know we did it, Cecil pointed out. We'd best make ourselves scarce and let the talk die down. Keep out of sight, and I'll get my gun without drawing no notice. Then we can meet up at the saloon and pretend we ain't done nothing. Claire returned to the bank, concealing himself in the shadows. When Eleanor made her exit, he approached. Howdy, ma'am, he greeted. Reckon we got off to a bad start. Sorry if I scared you. I ain't gonna hurt you none. I just want my gun back. You slipshod, inept! She shook her head. Have you ever successfully committed a heist? You're behaving as if you aspire to emulate the legendary brigands, yet you have no sense of practicality. You shall never accumulate wealth if you blindly follow romanticized ideals. That's real nice, ma'am, but can I have my gun? Eleanor sighed. I shall attempt to simplify. You have no idea how to be a proper bandit. A lot of stories you hear about famous robbers aren't true. They couldn't possibly be. You seem to be the leader of these ruffians, yet you have no skill as a rogue. Hearing footsteps approaching, the pair turned to see the sheriff, followed by a breathless teller. That's him, the teller panted. That's one of them fellers that was trying to rob our bank. I didn't take nothing, Claire protested. The bank ain't missing no money, so you can't arrest me for robbing it. This lady who talks real purty stole my gun. I do have this Muggs Barker, Eleanor confessed. I nicked it when... Seeing the sheriff's look of confusion, she rolled her eyes. Some people failed to understand her when she spoke formally, but when she tried to speak colloquially, she still found herself unable to express her thoughts in a way that held meaning to those around her. He was trying to rob the bank, she explained. I acted as though I might faint, and he caught me, but I stole his gun on the way down. I don't intend to keep it. I would have returned it to him already, but I feared that as soon as I was unarmed, he would take advantage of the situation. He may even snuff me, but I can't possibly be in any danger now that you've arrived. At your word, I shall gladly return his gun. You ain't been in town too long, have you? The sheriff asked. Eleanor shook her head. Real slow-like, grab the gun by the barrel, then hand it over to me nice and easy. She complied. Did this Vasey Gibface not understand that she could still turn the gun at a moment's notice and end his miserable existence if she wished? Did he truly believe himself to be safe merely because she was a woman? Much obliged, ma'am. The lawman stood in silence for nearly a full minute, contemplating the situation. Finally, he turned to Claire. I ought to clean your plow and lock you up for attempted armed robbery. You know good and well you ain't supposed to carry guns in public places, and you can't fire 'em in town unless you're protecting your home. Furthermore, you ain't even from here. Visitors is supposed to leave their guns with me when they arrive in town. What came over you to do what you done?" Claire felt a sharp retort on the tip of his tongue, but he thought it best to hold his peace. "This being your first offense, I reckon I can let you off with a stern warning, but a man's got to take responsibility for his actions. You ain't responsible enough to own this here gun, so you ain't getting it back." The robber looked away, lest his face betray his anger. "Ma'am, are you visiting us, or do you aim to settle here?" "I intend to stay," Eleanor replied. "You being a widder and all, you need all the help you can get. After you get a home for yourself, you just come to my office, and I'll let you have the gun. Just remember to keep it at your house, or if you go somewheres out of town." "Yes, sir," she smiled demurely. "I am greatly comforted to know I inhabit a community with a wise and just man overseeing our laws." Claire felt as if the words he yearned to say were caught in his throat, choking him. However, he knew that in losing his temper, he may accidentally reveal himself as the habitual criminal who had never been identified and thus had evaded arrest. He should at least be grateful that the law enforcement of Prairie Grass wasn't as strict as in most places he visited, but he could hardly believe that this woman dared to imply he was inexperienced. How was she a widow? She seemed far too vivacious, and she wore no black. Furthermore, she was clearly a youth. He sincerely doubted she had seen 2 full decades of life. They encountered each other again at the dance that evening. Rather than the ballrooms where she was accustomed to dancing, Eleanor followed the other residents of Prairie Grass to the cottonwood tree on the edge of town, where they held social gatherings when the weather was favorable, meeting in the saloon on colder, rainy days. Claire seized her hand. "We need to talk." Eleanor frowned. "That's a rather unusual way for a gentleman to ask a lady to dance with him." "I don't dance, especially not in public. Reckon you think you're purty clever, don't you? Well, I ain't half the fool you take me for. A lady who talks real purty and dresses like she's got too much money comes to a town that ain't got nothing, and she don't have a man with her, and she wants to stay rather than look around and move on. You're among the Willows, ain't you?" "By no means. It's a cottonwood. Now let us enjoy the music." He glared, but as the sheriff and his wife were dancing nearby, Claire dared not continue the conversation. No doubt this foreigner had done something terrible and fled to Prairie Grass, intending to stay for only a short while, but eventually concluding that she must remain concealed here permanently if she valued her life. To no one's surprise, Klaus was making every effort to convince Amelia to dance with him. Although she graciously refused each time he asked, Klaus at least had the consolation of making money, for he had brought a few drinks from the saloon, and as the dancers grew thirsty, they would make purchases. Nate doffed his hat and bowed to Tex, holding out his hand. "Being that your husband ain't here to dance with you, may I have the honor?" Her eyes gleamed with joy as she placed her hand in his. "I'd be right proud." All eyes were on the stagecoach guards, for they glided effortlessly through a series of intricate steps. "How's your husband?" Nate queried politely. "Still ailing, but he ain't here. You are. I want to enjoy the moment." She was certain all present could hear her heart pounding, and as she felt her face grow warm, she hoped that any flush on her cheeks might be attributed to the dancing rather than her emotions. "I don't never want this dance to end," Nate whispered. "I wish I could spend the rest of my life dancing with my arms around you." "That don't sound like something friends tell each other," she responded softly. "What are you really saying?" "Only that I love you enough that I'd give my last breath for you." She smiled. "I'll love you till the day my heart stops." Nate could hardly bear the torture. He was clasping the hand of his beloved and pulling her closer, yet he dared not kiss her. Was it a sin to be in love with another man's wife, or was it only wrong if he behaved lustfully?